Hello and welcome to this week's edition of World Today, where we'll focus on a lot of important developments, beginning with France. Protests continued in France with heavy security deployment to prevent violence spreading over the fatal shooting of a teenager by police. A Nike store has been ransacked by the protesters. At least 400 people have been arrested so far. Here's a detailed report.
France is on fire. At least 400 people have been arrested after protests broke out in France following the police shooting of the teen. The country's elite police unit, the Raid, has been deployed in several cities to contain the violence. Protesters in Nanterre clashed with the police, who fired tear gas at the crowd. The deceased Nahil's mother also led a silent march, which was attended by thousands of protesters.
These are the things that happen when you're French but with foreign roots. We are not considered French and they only look at the color of our skin. Where we come from, even if we were born in France. And even so, you can't just kill someone for no reason. So, racism within the police kills, and way too many of them embrace far-right ideas. So, this has to stop.
Meanwhile, a Nike store was looted in central Paris. Video showed protesters attempting to break into a Nike sportswear shop. The facade of the Paris Olympics Aquatic Training Center was also damaged by rioters. The company Solidio said it is considering taking extra security measures at all Olympic building sites to prevent any further damage. Fireworks were set off and a swimming pool construction site was set ablaze in the Persian suburb of Obliviers. Buses too were burnt during the protests. French President Emmanuel Macron called a crisis meeting and called the violence unjustifiable. He has appealed for calm.
Clearly, the emotion that comes with the death of a young man calls for contemplation and calm. And it's what the government has constantly called for. I think this is what should continue to guide the next hours and the tributes. Nonetheless, it has been the subject of reactions, presumably attempts to change what happened, and the last hours have been marked by violent scenes against police stations, but also schools and town halls, and basically against institutions and the Republic. It's absolutely unjustifiable.
The French activists have also renewed calls to tackle the systematic police abuse, particularly in the neighborhoods where the 17-year-old lived. Most of the residents there face poverty or racial or class discrimination. With Mahashweta Lala, Bureau Report, India Today.
And now news from Russia. Vladimir Putin spoke to his military officials days after the Wagner insurrection. He thanked his forces for stopping a civil war and blamed the West for wanting Russians to kill each other.
Russian mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin landed safely in Belarus from Russia on Tuesday morning. Flight Radar 24 tracked his business jet taking off from the Rostov region in Russia and descending near Minsk in Belarus. The Wagner chief was the first to avail the escape route offered by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I thank those soldiers and commanders of Wagner Group who made the only right decision. They did not go to fratricidal bloodshed. They stopped at the last line. Today, you have the opportunity to continue serving Russia by entering into a contract with the Ministry of Defense or other law enforcement agencies, or to return to your family and friends. Whoever wants can go to Belarus. The promise I made will be fulfilled.
Данное мною обещание будет исполнено.
The charge of mounting an armed mutiny carries a punishment of up to 20 years in prison in Russia. Wagner mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin escaped the dire future as the Russian authorities said that they have closed a criminal investigation into the rebellion and no charges will be imposed against him or any of the other participants, just as the president indicated in his speech. But then, Putin has a bigger enemy to fight. He has trained his gun at Kyiv leadership and the West.
Именно такого исхода братоубийства хотели.
It was precisely this outcome, fratricide, that Russia's enemies wanted. Both the neo-Nazis in Kyiv and their Western patrons and all sorts of national traitors. They wanted Russian soldiers to kill each other, to kill military personnel and civilians, so that in the end, Russia would lose and our society would split, choke in bloody civil strife.
Захлебнулась в кровавой междоусобице.
West, keenly monitoring Russian development, denied any hand in the Wagner uprising.
I also convened our key allies on a Zoom call to make sure we're all on the same page. It's critical that we're coordinated in our response and coordinated in what we to anticipate. They agreed with me that we had to make sure we gave Putin no excuse. Let me emphasize, we gave Putin no excuse to blame this on the West or to blame this on NATO. We made clear that we were not involved. We had nothing to do with it. This was part of a struggle within the Russian system.
After a tumultuous weekend mutiny in which the Russian mercenary chief exposed Kremlin's vulnerability, Moscow is working hard to gloss things over to justify and blame the rest of the world for its predicament. Bureau Report, India Today.
So who is Yevgeny Prigozhin, the chief of the Wagner Group, and what is the Wagner Group? Prigozhin is also known as Putins Chef. The Wagner Group have been active in Ukraine since 2014, and the mercenary group, comprising some of the best former commandos and soldiers of the Russian armed forces, have operated both in Africa and in Central Asia and also in Latin America. The fighters of this private army are hailed as heroes in Russia for fighting against all odds and winning Bakhmut in recent operations. But the recent insurrection is now being termed as one of the worst of its kind, and Putin has called them backstabbers.
From Putin's chef to cooking up a global storm with an armed mutiny, Yevgeny Prigozhin finds himself at the center of the attempted coup. Prigozhin is one of Russia's richest and most influential men, but he's had humble roots. He started his business initially as modest hot dog seller in St. Petersburg. He eventually opened a series of chic restaurants, including one on a floating boat called New Island, that became a favorite of another St. Petersburg native, Vladimir Putin. Lucrative state contracts followed, and with time, Prigozhin's activities expanded beyond the kitchen. For instance, in 2012, he won more than 10.5 billion rubles of contracts to provide food to Moscow's schools. However, despite the riches that the food industry brought him, in 2014, he diversified into a new sector, the private military. It is unclear whose idea was it from the Wagner Group, whether Putin asked Prigozhin for help or the latter pitched it to him. Either way, the group came into existence during Russia's 2014 invasion of Crimea. Wagner's success in these early operations led to the group's swift expansion. Wagner became a proxy army for Putin. Subsequently, Wagner Group began to be involved in almost every conflict in the world where Russia had a role to play, from civil wars in Sudan and Libya in Africa to Venezuela during the presidential crisis of 2019. When Putin decided to invade Ukraine in 2022, Prigozhin and his Wagner Group were at the heart of Russian operations. The group benefited Russia significantly. It captured the key regions of Soledar and Bakhmut for Russia. White House officials estimate the private mercenary group employs around 50,000 soldiers. Of those, 40,000 are thought to be convicts who have been employed from prisons in Russia. What role will Prigozhin and his Wagner group play now is unclear. Will they mount an assault on Kyiv from Belarus, or will they regroup against Putin? Bureau Report, India Today.
Now, dozens of Iraqis protested in front of the Swedish embassy in Baghdad against the burning of Quran outside a mosque in the Swedish capital of Stockholm. They also burned a rainbow-colored flag representing the LGBT community as a backlash and chanted "Yes, yes" to the Quran. Many Islamic countries, including Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan and Morocco, have registered their protest against the incident. The protests follow after a man tore up and burned a Quran outside Stockholm's central mosque, after the Swedish police granted permission for the protest to take place. The man was charged of agitation against an ethnic or national group. Now, Chinese investments in Balochistan of Pakistan are under real threat. This because Balochistan is one of the backward regions in Pakistan, and the people over there have always been complaining of being ignored by the federal government sitting in Islamabad. The latest being Balochistan Liberation Army attacking Pakistani convoys, Pakistani military and Pakistani assets. Baloch armed rebels are systematically targeting Pakistan's energy sector by attacking coal mines in the Balochistan province. A recent attack by the Baloch Liberation Army set fire to 20 coal trucks in Harnai of Balochistan. These trucks were reportedly ferrying coal to thermal power plants in the Punjab. The BLA fighters also attacked the motorcade of the Deputy Commissioner of Harani. In a press release, the BLA said, and I quote, "Freedom fighters of Baloch Liberation Army targeted convoy of Deputy Commissioner and vehicles transporting plundered Baloch national resources in Harnai last night. A suspicious individual was also arrested." The resistance is to the exploitation of mineral wealth, which has affected Pakistan's economy in the past and will continue to affect the China-Pakistan economic corridor. That is a critical part of China-Pakistan coordination and cooperation. OceanGate's shattered submersible has returned to shore, and presumed human remains of the 5 civilians on board that were crushed to pieces in an undersea implosion may have also been recovered. Here's a report with all the details.
Possible human remains from the Titan submersible were recovered on Wednesday, brought to shore alongside what's thought to be debris of the shattered vehicle. Video shows what appeared to be the nose of the submersible and other fragments wrapped in white tarp, winched from a ship and unloaded at St. John's Port in Canada's Newfoundland. The fragments may shed more light on what caused the catastrophic implosion of the sub, which was descending to the century-old wreck of the Titanic earlier this month. Among the dead on board was Stockton Rush, CEO of OceanGate Expeditions, which operated the sub. Also killed were British billionaire Hamish Harding, Pakistani-born businessman Shahzada Dawood and his son, and French oceanographer Paul-Henri Nargeolet. The US Coast Guard said in a statement medical professionals will conduct a formal analysis on the presumed human remains. Experts had raised safety concerns about the Titan sub and questioned OceanGate's decision not to pursue recognized certification processes for the sub's design, fabrication and testing. The accident has also raised questions about the unregulated nature of such expeditions. The debris field of the doomed vessel was found last Thursday near the wreckage of the Titanic, 13,000 feet deep in the North Atlantic Ocean.
Uruguay is fighting severe water crisis as water levels in the Paso Severino reservoir has depleted. Residents are forced to drink salty water as local workers continue to dig for underground water. Here is a detailed report.
As countries battle climate crisis, Uruguay is drilling wells to reach water beneath the ground as it faces drought and high temperatures. President Luis Lacalle Pou has declared water emergency. The water levels in the Paso Severino reservoir, which provides fresh water to 60% of the country's population, has dropped to grave levels. According to local media reports, water levels could deplete in July. Residents of Montevideo are forced to drink salty water with high levels of chlorides, sodium and trihalomethanes. The Public Water Utility OSC has been mixing salty water with fresh water from the Paso Severino Reservoir to extend the supply of water. Meanwhile, the sale of bottled water has gone up. The retail groups are finding it difficult to keep up with the demand, giving rise to plastic waste. The South American country claims to be the world's first country to enshrine the access to water as a fundamental right. With Mahashweta Lala, Bureau Report, India Today.
And here's some other news from across the world in World at a Glance. Take a look.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has ordered his top military commanders to boost defenses in the northern sector as the Wagner group leader arrives in Belarus. Yevgeny Prigozhin flew to Belarus from Russia under a deal negotiated by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko that ended the Wagner group's 24-hour mutiny. Top Russian military general Sergei Surovikin, deputy commander of the Russian group forces that is fighting Ukraine, has been arrested. The arrest has been reported days after Wagner group mercenaries took over the military headquarters in the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don and were heading towards Moscow in what appears to have been an aborted insurrection. The US Supreme Court on Thursday struck down race-conscious admission policies of North Carolina and Howard University. It also struck down affirmative action policies in college admissions, declaring race cannot be a factor. This ruling effectively curtails actions at colleges and universities around the US. The UN General Assembly on Thursday created an independent body to probe thousands of people who remain missing in Syria since war broke out in 2011. More than 1 lakh people have disappeared since the war started and more than 500,000 people have been killed so far. But Syria, along with Russia, China and Iran, objected to the new body, saying it had not been consulted on the resolution. The annual inflation in Germany hit 6.4% in June, according to the data released by the country's Federal Statistical Office. Statistics show that Germany's inflation rate in June picked up after declining for 3 consecutive months, with the core inflation, which is calculated without considering energy, food, tobacco and alcohol prices, reaching 5.8%, up 0.4% from the previous month. Food price hike remained the biggest driver of inflation in the month, rising 13.7% from May, when the country's inflation was 6.1%. The lowest since March 2022. Google has announced plans to remove Canadian news articles from its search engine and other products in Canada after the law requiring major online platforms to pay news publishers takes effect in the country. Google also said that Canada's Bill C-18, the Online News Act, which was passed last week, remains unworkable and a wrong approach to supporting journalism in Canada. Last week, Meta also said it would remove Canadian news from Instagram and Facebook.
That's all in this edition of World Today, but before I go, I leave you with this interesting news of innovation. A bag almost invisible to the naked eye, a bag small enough to pass through a needle. This speck-sized tote measuring less than 0.03 inches just sold for a whopping $63,000. This microscopic bag is heavily influenced by the iconic Louis Vuitton monogram on the Go tote, which costs anywhere between $3,100 to $4,300. It has been made by New York-based art collective Mischief. The auction of the bag was ironically held by Louis Vuitton menswear creative head Pharrell Williams' own auction house. Take care and goodbye.